Please welcome our first speaker, Shamikh, Badra.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming and supporting Palestine. Such a topic provokes a sequence of questions that relate to the past as much as to the present. First, it is important in this event to frame the conflict. It is important in this event to frame the conflict in Palestine as Israel is a settler colonial state and the Palestinians are leading an anti-colonial struggle. In this sense, we can refute the historical narrative of Zionism about the situation in Palestine, especially their conscious advocacy of a binary conflict framework or a religious conflict by early Zionist leaders. They aim by this claim to counter accusations of settler colonialism and mobilize non-Zionist Jews. This could highlight a reason for Zionist anger when Israel is accused as an entity of settler colonialism. Zionists often describe this accusation as anti-Semitic. Israeli public diplomacy, the Hasbara, uses a maneuver in order to deny the colonial characteristic of Israel and to keep it out of international consciousness.
That's it.
In this regard, it is significant to correct some misconceptions surrounding the nature of Palestinian struggle. Such misconceptions have occurred for many decades by Western media, especially after the terrorist attacks against the World Trade Center in 2001. Those attacks can be regarded as a turning point in history. The attacks increased Western media bias against Palestinians. In contrast, Western media depicted the Israelis as being interested in peace and in the process of compromising with Palestinians. During the so-called war on terror, Western media connected the Palestinian issue with terrorism while describing Israel as civilized defender in the supposed clash of civilization. In this context, it is important for our supporters to use the correct language as advocated for by Palestinians. We are the indigenous Palestinians, not Arab in Israel. They are Israeli colonial settlers, not citizens. It's ethnic cleansing in Jerusalem, not eviction. It's settler colonial terrorism, not clashes. They are not Israeli defender forces. They are Israeli occupation forces. It's not war like war between two equal parties. It's aggression. It is resistance, not terrorism. It is important to remember that resistance has been legitimized by the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3246 of 29th of November 1974, reaffirming the legitimacy of the people's struggle for liberation from colonial and foreign domination and subjugation by all available means, including armed struggle. It is important to lobby the International Criminal Court and called for investigation into Israelis' war crimes and the crimes against humanity that continue to be committed in Palestine, including in Sheikh Jarrah, West Bank, and Gaza. Palestinians insist on prosecuting the leaders of Israeli occupation for their crimes against civilians in Palestine to the International Criminal Court. We call for the establishment of an international movement that supports us in this regard. In this event, I'd like to confirm the important decision by the National Labour Conference to place in its national platform the recognition of Palestine. It is called for the next Labour government to recognize a Palestinian state. This issue will be an important priority. In this respect, I'd like to remind you that Western powers such as Britain, France, and United States, besides the Zionist movement, actively have opposed the Palestinian aspiration for statehood and independence since 1917. Both Britain and the Zionist movement treated the prospect of independent Palestinian state as a grave threat. The Zionist movement saw such prospect as particular challenge to the Jewish aspiration to exclusive sovereignty over what they consider the land of Israel. Also, in order to show solidarity, we urge you to join your local BDS group and boycott companies highlighted by BDS on their boycott list. Encourage your workplace and any organization you are part to comply with the boycott too. In light of the serious violation of human rights by Israeli occupation, the international community and Western countries should stop supporting Israel. At least they should end military ties with Israel, because military ties and cooperation have encouraged Israel to continue its aggression and violation of human rights. For example, Israel is backed by $3.8 billion in annual military funding from the US government. It is significant to mention to the campaign of Greens in Australia for Palestine, which aim to end military ties with Israel. I hope Greens activate this important campaign again. It is important to encourage brave groups and activists among the youth from Jewish community in Australia who choose the struggle for justice over silence and complicity, who work to build a Judaism and Jewish community beyond Zionism. It would be good to mention the documentary screening in Dialogue Jews on the Borders, directed by Kea Kranko, which gives voice to the specific Jewish identity that's very existed within the Jewish community in Australia. I will not go to the details about film, just you can search, it is important. Break the Israeli blockade. I'd like to talk about my experience regarding solidarity, regarding the Gaza surfing project, as I am a member of the Northern Beaches Committee for Palestine, which is leading the Gaza surfing project. Our group succeeded in bringing Muhammad Saleh and Hassan al-Habil from Gaza to come to Sydney. After a long process, it took the committee nearly 2 years of hard work and negotiations to get Muhammad and al-Habil to Australia. In January 2020, North-Eastern Surf Life Saving Club hosted 2 men from Gaza, Muhammad and Hassan, to learn about the life saving in order to establish Nepal's program. They also undertook bronze medallion. The surfing life saving project seeks support for the establishment of Surf Life Saving Club in Gaza beach. The aim of this project is to provide children of Gaza a safe place to play and to learn to swim. This is example about showing solidarity to connect Palestinians with activities in sport, in culture, and this is one of the answer of the main question of this discussion. I have like example about solidarity, summarize the history of Palestine by beautiful song. I'd like to show this one. No voice. No voice, yeah? Okay. We can do that later. Okay. But still, we can delay that.
We'll try to fix it.
Okay.
There's a very little sound coming through. It's from your computer.
No right for return, no right for a home, no right to fight for the land that they own. And called Palestine, where Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived fine in the 1800s. It was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. Meanwhile, a bearded guy founded Zionists for Jews to aspire, and they closed their home and safe only for their kind. Then there was World War I that ended when the Allies won, and England was like, hey, this beautiful land is totally mine. Till the name was Palestine, even though it was colonized, and a promise for a Zionist state was made by men that had no right. Then more and more Jews arrived seeking refuge, and that's alright until their plan to steal the land was no longer to hide. The year was 1948 when Israel bullied its way to a state. Thousands of Palestinians fled their homes to survive. No right for a return, no right for a home, no right to fight for the land that the old Israel expanded more and more into an apartheid. Where is your humanity? Where is your respect for dignity? Cold conflict, past insanity. It's time to change your mind. One day Palestine will be free, so be on the right side of history. You're not anti-Semitic if you stand against war crimes. Don't be brainwashed by the news. Now you can see for yourself the truth. Learn about the story of Palestine.
In summary, please support BDS, demand the end military funding to Israel, and join us in the growing global movement in support of the right of return for Palestinians as a part of shared future of justice, equality, and freedom for all people. Finally, as a Palestinian, I'd like to confirm that despite of the oppression and the Israeli aggression, the spirit of Palestinian resistance will never be broken. Thank you so much.
So my name is Mutaz, Mutaz Abu Ghazaleh. Very happy to be here talking to you. I represent BDS Australia, part of the executive committee over there. And I guess what I'll try to do here is go through a few points, okay? I'm going to do a very quick, very brief history of Palestine and Mecca. It's not going to be as artistic as the YouTube video that you've seen just now, but I think it's important because to me, like this is our story, right? I come from a family of refugees. we were dispossessed to inside Palestine and outside Palestine. My family from my father's side ended up in Gaza, and my uncle in 1967 in one of the battles against the Zionists was killed in that battle near the city of Nablus. 20 years later, my father was killed by the Mutaz, the Israelis. So my grandma, I feel really bad for her. She had to outlive two of her sons, living in blockade in Gaza. So for me, the story is, as you can see, is very personal, right? That's my story. And I'm really glad to be here to talk to you about how you can help us and can support Palestinians. Okay? So that's the history I'm going to cover. Of course, there are some recent events that we've all witnessed in the past few weeks. Okay, and I'll talk about that. Then I guess my key ask is going to be more around BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. I'll go in a bit more details about that. Okay, so you're familiar with the history. I'm not going to go through all of this. But again, Palestine has always been populated by Muslims and also Christians and Jews. So it's a holy land. It's the land of the three religions. Everyone used to live there. That all changed by World War I, by the end of World War I. Okay. I guess the Balfour Declaration, which we've also seen in the video, has promised the land to the Zionists. And I think that kind of started changing everything when the Zionists started arriving to Palestine, and their population started to increase and slowly started taking over the land and dispossessing the Palestinians. Interestingly, they believe it's a God-given right. Most of them don't even believe in God. Okay? But they still believe He promised them Palestine. Now, 1948, for us, this is what we call a Nakba, which translates to the catastrophe. That's when the Zionists declared the establishment of the Israeli state. In 1948, leading up to 1948, and even before that, many Palestinians were dispossessed. Villages and towns and were destroyed. People were forced to leave their homes and never be able to come back. And for us, that's kind of very, very important date. However, it doesn't stop there. So during a Nakba, or the 1948 Nakba, approximately like almost up to 1 million Palestinians were forced into exile. Okay, my family being one of them. Okay, 8 million Palestinian refugees living in occupied Palestinian territories and neighboring were denied the right to return to their homes. Okay, and of course, there's like something around 150,000 Palestinians that stayed within the borders of 1948 and became a second-class citizen in Israel. And we learned later that Israel has got so many laws to discriminate against citizens from a Palestinian or an Arab origin just because they're not Jews. Because the Nakba didn't stop in 1948. It continues until today. And again, I guess some of the recent events in Sheikh Jarrah is, I guess, one of the examples that we've all witnessed on media, especially during the holy month of Ramadan. And as some of you already know, most of you already know, Ramadan is a very holy month for Muslims. And during that month, the Palestinians were trying to pray at the Aqsa. The Israelis, the police and defense stormed the Aqsa, and it was up to kids to go and fight and resist and force them out. Obviously, it all started in early 1917 with the declaration and the arrival of the Zionists. 1947, this is what it used to look like from a population perspective. Green being like a Palestinian land, and the white spots are Jewish settlements during that period. And then there was a partition plan in 1947, which I think the ratio was to give 55% of the land to less than 30% of the people. So 55% goes to the Zionists, 45% goes to Palestinians, which is obviously not fair. But what ended up happening is the Zionists took 78% of the land, okay, leaving us with almost 22%. So this was the plan. As you can see, there's Gaza there, and there's a bit into the desert. But what ended up happening is this. But again, this didn't stop. The land grab continues, and today with the apartheid walls surrounding and inside the West Bank, that kind of separates the Palestinian land altogether. And you can see like the Palestinian land is diminished, okay, with the building of the settlements and the possessing of Palestinian homes. I think this is very, very important, because when we get to the PDS, that's a very important notion over there. Okay. Now, what did the Palestinians do? It's been 100 years of struggle. So we tried everything. Okay, you've heard of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which kind of the armed struggle against the Israelis, all kind of operations. And in 1987, 93 and 93 was the first Intifada, or the uprising, and that's when little kids started throwing stones at the Israelis and the settlers. So that was like a form of resistance that they had. So, like literally everything that the Palestinians can do, they tried. But again, Palestinians were always outnumbered and outpowered by the Israelis and their arms and weapons and finance from supporting countries. So there wasn't a victory, maybe small achievements here and there, but it wasn't, we can't call any of that a victory. Now, year 2000 to 2005, we had the second Intifada. Eventually, Israel withdrew from Gaza, but then, since then, Gaza has been in full blockade. Okay, and Israel since then been waging war on Gaza. We've seen the massacres in 2008, 12, 14, and just recently in 2020, and it never stops. So as you can see, it's been more than 100 years of struggle, where we tried almost all kind of resistance, different ways to deal with the Israelis. Latest events is the issues that we have in Sheikh Jarrah. Again, Nakba continues, catastrophe continues. People didn't ask to, not ask, it was not nicely, right? We pushed to leave their houses, right? And then until the young Palestinians started resisting, and we came to know about this in the media, and you've seen all of the demonstrations that happened here on the weekends too, in solidarity and support. So the question is, like, what can we do about all of this, right? We're not over there, we cannot carry a stone, we're not going to carry a stone and go over there, right? So what can we do from where we are here, okay? So this is where the movement for Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions comes into play. Okay? Around 2005, some 177 groups from Palestine. So it's basically what the Palestinians are asking for. They came together and put the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. So it's a non-violent action. It is inspired by the history of resistance that we had, also inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement and the US civil rights movement. And we look at the goals of the BDS. We've got three main points here. Number one is to end the occupation and colonization of all Arab lands and to dismantle the wall. Number two is to recognize the fundamental rights of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality. We know that Israel has got some 70-something discrimination laws against the Arab Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. And number three is respect, protect, and promote the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their home as stipulated by the UN Resolution 194. So today, any Jewish anywhere around the world can land in Tel Aviv, they'll be granted entry and citizenship. Doesn't matter where their family come from, doesn't matter where they come from. I don't buy into this promised land. I think it was Edward Said that said, I never knew that God is a real estate agent. But Palestinians who had homes and lands taken from them, we don't have the right to return. Okay? I'm going to try to wrap up this very quickly. Yeah. So BDS, just to explain, BDS is a strategic and a focused national campaign that do achieve victories. I'll talk about some of the achievements that we had here in Australia, and I'll talk about some of the campaigns. I think the key thing, and on why I'm asking you to support BDS, because it's really a very focused and very strategic campaign. We go through a lot of planning, a lot of research, a lot of analysis, so that we can pick the right campaigns, and we can choose campaigns that actually help advance the cause and help kind of create a dent in the kind of Israeli and the settlement organization. We don't, BNC doesn't publish like shopping list type reports or boycott this and boycott that. That's not what we do, because that's so fragmented. We prefer to kind of work based on campaigns, so that the effort is so concentrated, and we try as much as possible to achieve maximum impact with these campaigns. Okay? So, and probably I mentioned before, like, we've got a lot of volunteers, we've got a lot of people that we also can contract to help us do some work, and we do a lot of research. Within Australia and every country that runs a BDS, we have autonomy to go and come up with our plans that we believe are important for where we are. Okay? Now, we've heard a number of anti-BDS arguments. Okay? One of them is BDS is anti-Semitic. I think that's the argument against anything that calls for justice for Palestinians, not just BDS, right? If you try to criticize Israel, all of a sudden you're anti-Semitic. However, BDS is not a ban on Jewish businesses, right? It has nothing to do with that. We focus on the Israeli government and the companies and organizations that are complicit in the Israeli violations of international law, and we constantly target complicity and not the identity. Okay. Some of the arguments against BDS is that the BDS calls for the elimination of Israel, and I presented to you the three goals that we have in BDS. And again, as I mentioned, like Israeli, like any Jewish person can land in Tel Aviv, they become an Israeli citizen immediately, but a Palestinian refugee who has the right to land and a house, and to that, the UN Resolution 194 doesn't have the right to return to their house. And then there are some claims that BDS is a violation of freedom of speech. It's not. We don't restrict any academic employed by any Israeli university to speak. I would just ask people to boycott that speech. Okay, so some of the campaigns we had here in Australia, we've participated in some of the global victories against the likes of G4S, Viola, and Eurovision, and we have a very Australian victory here when Elbit, which is an arms manufacturer and supplier, the Israeli forces, was trying to get a contract with the Royal Flying Doctors organization, which is a very prestigious, respectful organization that really works really hard to save lives. Imagine them partnering with the likes of Elbit that put money in research and development into actually wasting life. Just doesn't make sense. And with a lot of hard work, we had a victory there, and that partnership was cancelled. Some of the most current campaigns, and I think just like we've signed into the code, the QR code. If you can, I'll leave this for a second. If you can.
Sorry, I was late.
Thank you. I would really ask how can non-Palestinians support? My ask from you is to support BDS. This is one way you can support us. Scan this QR code, or the QR code that Helmi is distributing now. That will take you to the petition against the two campaigns that we're actively working on right now. First one is HP, the second one is Puma. Okay. HP again plays a key role in providing technology to the Israeli oppression, the Israeli military, including technology for checkpoints and ID card system and all of that, which is at the heart of the apartheid system of the Israelis. What you see here is this is how the Palestinians are being treated at checkpoints inside the West Bank and Palestine. Okay, and then the technology provided by HP. So if you can go and have a look at that petition and sign that petition, I think that would be the best thing you can do right now as a non-Palestinian to go and help. Second one, I would like to highlight, and hopefully you get the flyer now in a second, or you can just scan this code here. Is to support us in the campaign against Puma. Puma supports the Israeli national football team with, of course, members from settlements. And settlements, those are basically settlements on Palestinian land. It's basically Palestinian people who used to live there, dispossessed to create those settlements. And Puma is supporting the national team. We know that Puma is also sponsors of a couple of teams over here in Victoria and also in Queensland. So if you can go and go to that petition page and sign, that would be great. Last one. This one I don't have a flyer for, so I'm going to leave it here. And please scan this QR code. This is very important. We're seeing unprecedented support for this petition. It's a petition at the Australian Parliament, to the Australian Parliament, to go and create policies to condemn the Israeli assault on Palestinians, to support targeted sanctions and arms embargo on Israel, to support the suspension of defense cooperation with Israel, and to end the defense industry partnership with Israel, to introduce legislation to ban all settlement goods and services from entering Australia, and to prevent Australian companies from operating, trading, or investing in settlements or contributing to their maintenance or expansion. We've seen a lot of support for this petition online. It's already on the Parliament of Australia website, and if you scan this one, you can go there and add your name to that petition. So I'm going to step aside for a second, give people a chance to scan the code. But also, like with the flyers, that will also take you to our website with a lot more details and information about campaigns. And if you missed any of those campaigns, you can also find on the website. But please, while we're here, and I can see a couple of phones coming out and people scanning their QR code, if you really want to help and want to help now, before you leave the room, this is one of the best ways you can actually help Palestinians right now. Okay? I'm going to leave for another minute or less, maybe. Okay? The other important thing is, obviously, I'll show our social media links, okay? Because I think it's very important if you join our list, so we can keep you posted with latest developments and campaigns. If you could, please donate. Financial resources go a long way in helping us build those campaigns and work on the campaigns and achieve some of those victories, which are very, very important for Palestinians. Just want to remind you with one last thing before I close. You asked, what can you as a non-Palestinian do to support, show solidarity? The Palestinian civil society in 2005 made that call for BDS and clearly asked and said that BDS is one of the most effective ways to resist. We've tried so many different things, not discounting all the other forms of struggle, but it is one of the most effective ways, and we've seen so many successes and victories in Australia and around the world. So please, show your support, sign your petitions, donate, because that will help us go a long way in our struggle. Thank you so much.
So the first question is to Jefferson at the back. 2 minutes, Jefferson.
I won't need 2 minutes. I was looking at YouTube this afternoon, and apart from 50,000 other YouTubers posting Free the Friendly Joldies, 500,000 hits yesterday after they were raided by the Special Anti-Terrorism Squad for following Braz around. I noticed a little item saying that Google has altered the map of Gaza. So I was curious to know if you caught up with that little juicy bit of gossip yet. And the other thing, under BDS, for the last 50 years, I suspect, nearly every Israeli 18-year-old boy has, and quite a few of the girls have gone over to Israel, even though they're Australian citizens, and done their compulsory 2-year military training. Could not that be included, that any Israeli Australian citizens who go to Israel for military training be declared foreign mercenaries? Thank you.
Who wants to?
So look, I don't have any comment on the Google map. I haven't seen that, but I really like your second suggestion. Maybe we should put that in a petition.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. Okay, Alice is over there.
Number 3 of your goals is that all Palestinians should be able to return, but that's very much disputed because the Palestinian diaspora has grown so much that it's Israeli Jews would be swamped. I don't know whether that's a good counter-argument, but that is very often made when I'm talking to people. I also would advise you, with rather long experience of close to 94 years, that it's not much use asking this government to do anything positive at all. The Greens, of course, have got the best policy. However, they're very unlikely to form government. At least the ALP has recognised Palestine. Don't you think that that might be a better way to go, to support one of those parties?
So look, thank you for your comments. I guess point number 3, I choose to exercise my right. That should be my choice. I don't have that right anyway. So that's a very important point. Okay. Your point about the government support probably shares similar sentiments, and I know that there are a number of other solidarity organizations in Australia that work solely on lobbying with the government, yeah, they work with different parties. They try to. This is a hard battle. It's not easy, but yeah, I know there is such effort happening. And again, our focus. I'm speaking from a BDS point of view. Our focus is primarily on launching and supporting those campaigns that we believe, hopefully, will lead us somewhere in our struggle.
Thank you. When we are talking about decolonization, that means we want to achieve democratic state. So right of return will be easy as long as we are talking about democratic state. The problem about the Israeli government, which doesn't respect the Palestinians to integrate with Jewish people to live together. There was shared life between Jewish and Christians and Muslims. And we want to work hard and struggle in order to achieve this shared life. So I don't think the right of return is hard to be achieved as long as we are talking about decolonization. So the problem about colonial system in Israel. So this is I.
Thanks, Shamikh. Okay, who's next? So to Hilmi and then Shib. Hilmi first.
Hello. Yeah, it's not really a question, it's an answer for this. Sorry, from my point of view. Look, I talked once in a synagogue in sometimes. I am Palestinian refugee. I lead PDS Australia. And they asked me this question. You lead PDS Australia. If the Palestinians return, there will be no Israel. I said, I am pragmatic. That's my view, at least. Let's first have two-state solutions, which the international community agreed on. Any Jews' right to go today and have citizenship should stop. All Palestinians would have the right to go to the 22% that we accepted. Let's wait 10, 15 years when this hatred and bloodshed stops, and then the whole people will have a referendum. With all the respect, the Zionist thinking that we should rule ourselves has to change. Judaism is a religion. It's not ethnicity or race. Similar to any other democratic country, Judaism should be out of politics. People vote not based on religion, based on merit, based on qualification, based on the leadership, based on the ability to lead. If they don't change this mindset, it will be a problem. However, there are examples in the world where the minorities still have the right constitutional rights by which we guarantee that there is no injustice or prejudice to them. There are so many solutions in the world by which guarantee that. The problem is, and this comes from me talking to a lot of Jews and Zionists, they do have this belief that if we don't rule ourselves, there will be a Holocaust. And that mindset should change. Maybe if we go by the solution I'm suggesting, that let's go first, have 15, 20 years of peace, and then, but the right of return is sacred, it's holy. As Mutaz said, how on earth someone, Jew now, who has no resemblance to the region whatsoever, has the right to go and live, while me, 70 years back, my parents left Jaffa. They died outside of Jaffa, and I have no right to live in Jaffa. That's my
Mark is the back. You.
Two questions. One is if there was equality in Palestine/Israel, what would, officially Israel class itself as the Jewish state of Israel. What happens to the Jews in terms of their right to say it's a Jewish state as opposed to just a state of Israel or a state of Palestine? And secondly, in terms of the people that are like the people are talking about references to the past, one of the interesting things that I found out was people were asking the question, if the Romans asked the Jews today to have access to the lands of Israel today, a lot of people were perplexed and trying to answer that question in terms of we have the right to refer to the past in terms of God gave us this land, but if someone else has conquered your land, do they have the right to ask the same thing and actually move in? And if that happens, where is the argument in terms of I have exclusive rights to this land as opposed to sharing the land or cohabitating with the locals, recognising that there was a past of Jews, but also there's a past of the Palestinians. So could you sort of give us some suggestions in terms of how you view that sort of approach?
Obviously, so many civilizations that came and went and was there in the land, the historical land of Palestine. So that's not new. The point about if Rome today comes to Israel is like, oh, we have a right of going back to the land, I think that will freak them out. Like we don't buy this argument. Again, when we talk about right of return, we're talking about people who actually own houses and lands. Right? They've got documents to show that this is my land, this is my house. I'm not talking about some mythology of being promised the land by Almighty real estate agent. That's not the case. So that's the bit that I got from your question. What was the first part?
What about the Jewish state or just the state of Israel? The Jewish state of Israel or the state of Israel?
I don't know what's wrong with that, right? I guess the fact calling it Jewish state is by itself is some form of apartheid and
Discrimination.
Right? And then they call it a democracy. So, yeah. I
Shamikh?
Just I want to confirm about important point. The problem about settlers who came from Europe to invade Palestine, they didn't came to integrate with indigenous people. They came to replace them. And in 1914, there was negotiation before the First World War between Palestinians and settlers who came from Russia and Europe. And Palestinians accepted the Jewish people to come to live with Palestinians, to integrate with Palestinians. But the problem, the Zionists refused to integrate with Palestinians. They came to replace them. This settler colonialism, this is the theory of colonialism, not to integrate, just to replace. This is happening in Australia, in New Zealand, America, and they want to eliminate from indigenous people by genocide or ethnic cleansing. What happened, it was ethnic cleansing, expel Palestinians. Even if Jewish people have the right to live in Palestine, they should not or they must not to eliminate by this way Palestinians. And there is no connection between Jewish people in Europe and the indigenous Jewish who were living in Middle East. If you are talking about Jewish state, or was a part of the history of the indigenous people. So if they come from Europe as the first immigration, by the way, Palestinians didn't fight against them. They welcomed them. But later, after the Zionist movement in 1897, they realized the colonial project in Palestine about ethnic cleansing and establish a state on the ruins of Palestinians. So it is important all the time to think, to integrate, to live together, to establish democratic state, and in this case, Jewish and Christians and Muslims can live together in peace and in equal rights, and we can achieve like a secular society. This is the idea. Thanks.
Thanks, Shamikh.
I'm Pat Ronald from the Australian Fair Trade Investment Network, and I just wanted to raise an issue because in my work analysing trade agreements, I'm aware that the Australian government is currently doing a feasibility study for a free trade agreement with Israel. And I assisted some of the local Palestinian solidarity groups to do submissions against this idea, but I just wanted to let people know that the government will look at the feasibility study and make a decision whether to proceed with negotiations or not, probably in the second half of this year. So I just wanted to ask if you're aware of that and whether that will become part of your campaign. Not to have a free trade agreement with Israel.
Yeah. Looking at Helmi, do you want to make a comment on this? Helmi is our convener for Videos Australia, so I think it's appropriate to direct this question to him.
Thank you. We did promote free trade with Israel very strongly. It's not one of our campaigns because campaigns, as Mutaz said, they have to have very thorough research. This came up all of a sudden, and we did promote it very strongly. And we have if you go to our website, you will see you could sign a petition against it. It's terrible. And there are so many organizations. In fact, let me admit that APAM, in Australia there are two umbrella organizations. APAM, Australia Palestine Advocacy Network, as Mutaz explained, they do the lobbying. BDS Australia, which is also an umbrella organization. Each umbrella has like so many organizations under it, which is pro-Palestine. They are specialized in lobbying and talking to governments. We are specializing in BDS only. So they led that, and we also pushed it, of course, and we asked so many organizations. And there was a quite good number of cases and even individuals. One in the Northern Beaches Committee of Palestine, Dr. Caroline Graham wrote it excellent. There are so many great, the problem, as someone said, we have a terrible government.
Yes.
We have incredibly terrible government. A government that votes in the United Nations against a resolution in United Nations that says the Palestinians should have the right for self-determination. It doesn't even mention Israel, and Australia votes against it. How on earth you vote against anyone to have the right? Answering your question again very quickly, I think what I said, in modern democracy, religions, there is no place for religions. If you say Jewish state, Muslim state, Christian state, does Australia say we are Christian state? Does USA say us we are? We shouldn't. I mean, there are backwards countries like Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or whatever, maybe. But in modern democracy, that's not acceptable. We live together, equal rights. Look, I understand that the Jews because of historical reasons. They have this fear from persecution, and that's understandable. And we should really give them the assurance that this should not happen again. Any anti-Semitism, we are more against it than what the Jews, than the Zionists. But that should not be used to be against us. Please stop manufacturing anti-Semitism against our rights. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the speakers. I'm in a bit of an unusual position because I actually help on a BDS stall nearly every weekend with a friend. Also, Laurie does too. Now, it's my opinion that there's a massive potential for getting young Palestinian and Arab people involved on stalls and this sort of thing, and also young Jewish people like Kia Kranko, who you've already mentioned, who made the film Borderlands. And I just wondered if there are any plans to really, I know it's not easy to get an activist organisation really up and running in Sydney, but if there are plans to increase the number of stalls and these sort of outreach in places like the Canberra, Punch Bowl, but also like, Bondi or Glebe or anywhere else, just to really get these up and running, to give it some oomph, some real clout among the population. Thank you.
So I think to answer this, like obviously we always how do you put it, recruiting, right? In terms of trying to attract members and try to attract also young organizations, be it student organizations or others. We've got talks with a number of organizations right now as we speak to get their support and help them kind of start up and start doing their action and also start supporting BDS. So definitely, I guess it's good to get the younger generations involved, and that's something we always try to do as part of kind of the strategies that we have in terms of spreading the BDS. Hopefully that answers the
Thank you very much, Mutaz. Look, I'm warning you. Oh, we've got 5 minutes to go. Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Jim.
Thanks very much to the speakers. I just wanted to raise the question of the bizarre situation we have inside Israel at the moment, where we have this Hydra-headed government with a one-point program is no to Netanyahu. And I don't know what their other policies are. I'm just wondering if that, in a sense, it's a weakness in the Israeli political situation at the moment. Is it possible that this can be exploited by the Palestinians too, to get some kind of advantage? Because this government will fall apart at the slightest problem. Particularly, and the second point is that Sheikh Jarrah, to me, is the critical issue. If Sheikh Jarrah is sitting there waiting to explode again, if the court decides to expel the Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah, we have another war. Absolutely no question about it, we have another war. Now, I just wonder, is there a real politic here that this Israeli government, do they want that? If they do that, they fall apart. So, I don't know, it's all speculation, but it looks to me like in a strange way, the Israeli government is in a weak position at the moment, rather than a strong one. Speculation, if any of the speakers would like to talk about it. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you for your question, comrade. Just I'd like to start with Sheikh Jarrah. This is important issue and so dangerous, especially what happened in Jerusalem. It's ethnic cleansing. It is ethnic cleansing started in 1948, and the Zionist government wanted to continue the ethnic cleansing because they have a plan. They have a plan. It's named Great Jerusalem. This plan is about the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in order to declare the Jerusalem is the capital of Jewish people, just for Jewish people. And now there is a systematic plan in order to expel Palestinians from Jerusalem. And for that, I don't think the situation will be like stable and will be violence, because they want people to leave to replace them, and no one can accept in the world that new settlers came and to replace and take my house and steal my house or my home. So I think today will be a big problem, because there is a march in order to pressure Palestinians and to leave their homes. And regarding about Israeli courts, we recognize of the occupation. We don't recognize of these courts. So what do you think about these courts will decide? No way to decide something like for anything for Palestinians. The court just to say that there is a decision by court in order to expel Palestinians. What is a court? And about government in Israel, all of them settlers, all of them killed Palestinians, all the staff, and all of them were leaders, gave orders to kill civilians. They are criminals, kill civilians, children. So we don't believe about any of the colonial parties and settlers like these governments. So yes, it is in weak situation because of resistance. So the only solution for Palestinian resistance, and we are proud about the resistance of Palestinians, and we are proud of supporters around the world who support legal resistance in Palestine. Thank you.